guys, Portal Master 9351 here, and in today's video, I'm going to be discussing something that I feel has not been discussed very much, or really at all, in anyone's channel to my knowledge. That being the Skylanders Champions 3-packs. Now, you might be saying, Portal Master, those things came out over a year ago, you did one video on them over a year ago, and you haven't talked about them since, and neither has anybody else. And well, that's actually exactly why I want to make this video. No one has talked about them, and they're a bit of a mystery that's never been addressed by anyone. Activision has never said anything about them. They've never been really advertised. I mean, it's pretty much just been, hey, they're for sale, go buy these new characters that aren't actually new, they're actually 3 years old. And it's really, really weird that they did that, so I did want to talk about them. But why now? Well, I have a video coming up that's going to be called Activision's Master Plan. And it's not only going to talk about the Skylanders franchise, but about their other franchises as well, like Spyro and Crash, and some other less important and relevant franchises. I mean, obviously they're relevant to the gaming community, like Destiny and stuff like that. That's a video that's coming up soon, but this is actually part of that discussion, and I wanted to go ahead and talk about it now so that I didn't end up going off on a tangent in the middle of that video talking about the Skylanders Champions 3-packs. Now, why would anything like the 3-packs be so significant to their master plan? Well, it's not right now, but let's just get into the discussion. So, the Champions 3-packs, there were 2 of them released, and they both had 3 characters that were released back in the Swap Force era. And that was it. They were literally the exact same characters that were released in the Swap Force era. Nothing was different. Some people were like, okay, they're the new Eons Elites. Well, yeah, kind of. I see where you're going with that, and even I said that they were the Eons Elites so that I could do the lighting a Skylander on fire video, but really they weren't Eons Elites. For all intents and purposes, they were just re-released characters. They were nothing. They were these characters released in these things. I mean, Eons Elites, even the Series 1 Eons Elites, were just the original, like, Series 1 poses with new paint jobs and new bases and new packaging. I mean, even then, there was still new stuff involved. A new paint job, a new base, and a new packaging. And while the Champions did have a new packaging, again, there was nothing different about them at all, not in the slightest. So what was their purpose? Why were they made? Well, there's a couple of main theories on why they were made. The first one is that there was an overstock. Activision simply had way too many of these random 6 characters from Swap Force, and they needed a way to get rid of them. Well, okay, that makes sense, but why put them in new packaging? Why bother after 3 years? Why are we just now getting this? Where have they been sitting for the past 3 years that they could not have been sold before, you know, Imaginators came out? That doesn't make a tiny bit of sense. What was their purpose? You know, if they were, you know, what were they doing? Why now is the whole big thing behind that. You know, Swap Force, especially not those characters, are not really relevant. Those characters were like everywhere during the Swap Force era. There were so many of those characters. Why re-release them now for overstock purposes? The other prevailing theory as to why they were actually released is that they were trying to give them to newer fans of the franchise. If you just got into Skylanders, it's going to be hard to get some of your older characters. Now, reposes in the past helped fix that problem. Didn't get into Spyro's Adventure? Well, that's fine, because in Giants, you could get a lot of your characters Something just fell on that shelf behind me. But what I was saying was you could get a lot of your characters as reposes. There were only 8 that you couldn't get. Whamshell was available, very limited at the very end, and I don't think that was their fault. Same thing with Ghost Roaster and Boomer. Those were like overstocked for a while and stuff like that. But the point is, they made these reposes to make sure you could get some of your older characters. Well, Swap Force also had reposes. Had a ton of reposes. They didn't sell terribly well. Trap Team had fewer reposes. I really don't think sold well. Then you got into Superchargers, where they just redid the old characters altogether, and they were basically new Skylanders. They played nothing like the older characters. They were completely different. There wasn't really a way to get some of those older characters, though, in their original forms. Imaginators had no reposes. What's the only game that we see this with, this sort of concept with? Well, it's Imaginators, and it's the only one that doesn't have reposes. And so that's sort of where this theory comes from. But my whole thing is, these are easy to find Swap Force characters. If you want a Zulu, it is not that hard to get a Zulu. If you want a Punk Shock, well, that's going to cost you some cash. You want a Scratch, that's also going to cost you some cash. You want, like, any of those characters like that, oh, that's going to be very difficult to track down and to find. But Zulu, Series 3 Spyro, no, those guys are not difficult to find in the slightest. They're super duper easy to find. So if they were actually going through the trouble of making new characters, characters, why would they have made these? They should have made the ones that were hard to find, because then if you made the ones that were hard to find, not only would new fans of the franchise actually like them, but so would the older fans who were just missing out on those. Now, there is one possible justification for this story that could, make it true, and that would be that Activision did not want to recreate the older versions of characters as to not diminish the value of them. So characters like Punk Shock and Scratch that are difficult to find. Well, right now they're actually worth, somewhat money. I don't know those two specifically. Those used to be really hard to find. I don't know if they're still worth money, but obviously certain Swap Force characters are going to be worth a little bit of money. And so if you actually start, remaking those characters in the exact same molds that they were, they're going to lose a lot of their value. Most of their value is wrapped up in how rare they are. Not how good they are, it's how rare they are. So if you make them not rare, well, they're not worth money anymore. This is actually a practice that we do see in other things, like the Magic the Gathering trading card game. There is something known as the reserved list, and that's a list of cards that Wizards of the Coast has promised to never reprint, so that the value of them does not, drastically decrease. There's some cards that were printed like 15 years ago that are worth a ton of money, and I'm talking like thousands of dollars, and if they were to ever reprint them, their value would drop so much. Like, it's ridiculous the amount that they would drop. They would just become completely and totally, common again, or at least less rare. And so perhaps that's what Activision did. But honestly, do you think, if Activision doesn't even care enough to listen to the fans to put in PvP, do they care enough about the collectors to say, you know what, your Punk Shock is worth $25. Wouldn't it be a shame if we recreated these things and bumped it down to 10? You know what, we care about you so much, we're not going to do that. Does that honestly sound like something Activision would do? Not really. It doesn't sound like that would be their priority number one, to worry about the value of collections. So I honestly do not think it was either of those theories. I don't think there was an overstock, and I don't think that they just wanted to make these more common necessarily. Like, I think it was part of the second one, but let's move on to what I actually think the purpose was. So, I've explained to you now what I don't think that these Champion 3-packs were and why they were created. I've explained to you what I don't think they were for. Now, let me explain to you what I think is the purpose of them, or at least was the purpose of them. So I'm gonna touch more on this in my Activision's Master Plan video, but there are some theories I've been discussing with some people that Activision originally had a different release schedule for Skylanders stuff, and they sort of changed up their plan later on, and this could tie into it, but honestly, I don't think it makes too much of a difference as to what these things were actually for. So, before now, every game has had reposes. From Giants to Superchargers, there's been reposes of some form. Whether or not the Superchargers things were actually considered reposes or just redoings of the characters altogether, that's for you to decide. But the point is, characters have been recycled in every single game with the exception of Imaginators, unless you count the villains, which I don't really count them because they never had figures before and weren't actually fully playable characters. So, this is sort of their substitution for that. But there was no fanfare behind this. There was no major announcement, no hyping up, get your returning, characters for that. There was none of that at all. What it was is it was an attempt to make money, and it failed. I mean, obviously everything Activision does is an attempt to make money. That's not anything major here. But they basically did not want to say, look at these new characters that we've lazily just re-released and stuff like that. They didn't want it to come off like that. They just kind of wanted to put it out there, and the people that wanted it would buy it. That was their intent. But why? Why do this? Well, it takes a lot of time to actually do reposes and stuff like that. And they were a bit more concerned with getting the nice, assortment of senseis that we got for Imaginators. They weren't terribly concerned with doing reposes. So then why even bother with this at all? Well, to make money. And they basically were trying, in my opinion, to test an upcoming strategy. Say what you will about Skylanders 7, whether you think it's happening or whether you don't think it's happening. I firmly believe that 100%, that at one point, maybe still even now, there was or is a plan to release a Skylanders 7. I'm not saying there is a Skylanders 7, but I'm saying at one point, there was definitely a plan to make another game following Imaginators. Whether there is or isn't, is for you to decide. But my theory is that in this Skylanders 7, the original plan was to release these in larger quantities, these re-released characters in larger quantities. This was a test. So remember how I said I think it was a little bit of that second option, which was to provide older, or newer players with the sort of I lost my words. What I'm trying to say is that partially the goal was to get these to newer players, newer fans of the franchise, but I think really it was just to see how well they would sell to these newer players of the franchise. It was an experiment designed to test for the second one. I think that at one point, maybe even now, there are plans to release these champions in their older forms in these new boxes in newer games. But the thing is, Imaginators did not have a ton of new fans that it brought to the franchise. Of course, old fans loved Imaginators. And, I mean, a lot of people liked Imaginators, but let's face it, most of the people who bought Imaginators had bought the previous, 3, probably, Skylanders games. Let's be honest here. They probably were dedicated fans. I'm not saying there were no new fans for Imaginators, but the vast majority were more than likely returning fans. This is where it ties into the master plan part, because if this theory is true, then it could be that they are still planning on using this in the future, assuming there are future games. Because it's pretty much going to be, I'm pretty sure that this is what's going to happen if they release a game late 2018 or early 2019. Which I think that if there's going to be a new game, it's going to be early 2019, but whatever. The point is that if they go on a break for a year and then they come back and start reintroducing their entire market basically to the world, there's going to be new fans that pick up on it and they're going to buy these Champion 3 packs. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that these specific Champion 3 packs are what are going to sell for a specific Skylanders 7. That is definitely going to happen. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is, if there was to be a Skylanders 7, which at one point there definitely was a plan to do it, this was a test run for a larger scale operation in a future game. This is all basically way out there. I get it. I'm basing this on very little actual fact. But there was a purpose for releasing the Champion 3 packs. It's that simple. There was a purpose, and there are 3 options. Option number 1, overstock was sitting around and they finally decided to do something about it. Option 2, they were like, let's pick these 6 Skylanders that probably everyone has because they were so common, and if you don't have them, you can go and buy them for dirt cheap online, and let's see if we can get people to buy them. Or option 3, let's see how this works with, very little announcement, not really going into specifics, seeing how it affects for the future. The reason I specifically believe that it was number 3 is because if it was number 2 exclusively, there would have been an announcement for it. They would have said, we're releasing these 6 characters because some of you didn't have an opportunity to get them the first time around. Granted, if it was option 1, they also probably would not give a ton of fanfare, but as I've said, option 1 is almost straight out for me because honestly, guys, they don't just sit on these things for 3 years in a warehouse. And I mean, what would they do? They were almost definitely packaged if they had them. They don't just make the figures and not package them. I mean, it's an assembly line that goes through the assembly line. The figures are made and then they are packaged on the same assembly line. Maybe it's 2 different factories, but it's like an assembly line. I mean, it is how the system works. They don't just not package thousands of these figures and find them lying around 3 years later, because they would have to all be tested once again. That's way too much work. So it was either option 2, but it's probably not option 2 because there was no announcement on it, so that only leaves option 3. I'm not saying that option 3, which is my theory that it was a test for future games, assuming that they were going to be made, but it seems to me like that is the most likely thing. Does this hint towards Skylanders 7? No. Does it, if assuming theory 3 is correct, that is, does it hint towards Skylanders 7? No. Does it pretty much confirm that at one point there was plans for a Skylanders 7, even though there may or may not still be plans for it? That it does. And I'm almost certain that there were plans for a Skylanders 7 at one point or another. Anyways, guys, that is all I have for you guys today. Tell me what you think of this theory down in the comments. I know that this is a bit interesting and a bit abstract. I promise I will connect back to it in my Activision's master plan video, but I think you can understand why I did not want to include this in that video. That video is probably going to be 20 to 30 minutes, and I did not want to make it a 45-minute video by including this 15-minute theory interjected in the middle of it. So, again, tell me what you guys think about it. I'll have more stuff to come. Exams for me are almost done, the semester's almost done, and videos should be coming back very soon. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. This has been Portal Master 9351. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.